Delegates across China are preparing for their most significant annual political gatherings, known as the Two Sessions. The nation's political advisory committee, known as the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or the CPPCC, will start meetings tomorrow at 3 p.m. It's considered secondary, though, to the gathering of the country's top legislature as the National People's Congress, which opens on Thursday. The simultaneous meetings take place as China embarks on its new planning cycle. The 15th five-year plan will guide the nation's policy direction through the end of the decade. Although policymakers are facing an increasingly complex trade and geopolitical environment, officials are still upbeat about the path forward.
我国经济从来都是在披荆斩棘中一路前行，在风雨洗礼中成长壮大。虽然还面临一些老问题、新挑战，但基础稳、优势多、韧性强、潜能大，长期向好的支撑条件和基本趋势没有变。
And Drew Thompson joins us in the studio. He is a senior fellow from Rajaratnam School of International Studies at NTU right here in Singapore. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you for having me.
All right, confidence amid trial and tribulation. Do you see that as the consistent messaging at this year's Two Sessions?
Well, I think the Two Sessions this year, particularly the National People's Congress, is going to be a status quo meeting. It's really about continuing Xi Jinping's legacy. It's about the 15th five-year plan, supporting the 14th and 13th outcomes. It's about really getting China through another year of political meetings and setting economic targets, setting defense spending targets. And remember, the purpose of the National People's Congress is also to direct the work of government, to give out a government work report, to both report what has happened in the past year, but also provide guidance to local level governments, provincial and below, so that they understand what economic targets, what social development targets, and what security targets there are. And then they can nest together like dolls and understand what their role is within the greater political system. So the NPC is very important, but it's really about maintaining the course.
And that course would be?
Security, not economic development. Using the economy and harnessing it to secure the party, provide for its security, and achieve greater resilience, both social as well as economic resilience, using industrial policy to improve its technological self-sufficiency, its industrial self-sufficiency, and further the Made in China 2025 plan, which was ensconced in the 13th five-year plan, to ensure that China is the leading industrial power in high tech and not dependent on foreign countries for its own economic and technological development.
So China's interpretation of security is a whole nestling of dolls. So you mentioned defense spending. So it's a naked buy more guns, defend yourself, but also making sure you're not reliant on something like foreign technology, particularly very advanced technology. And that builds on the 13th five-year plan and the 14th five-year plan.
So this is about continuity. And China's definition of security is very holistic. And it begins with the political security for the party all the way to national security. So one of the key elements that'll be at the National People's Congress is defense spending. So last year they announced that defense spending would be approximately 7.2% increase. It was about $250 billion announced defense spending, and this year they'll announce what the 2026 budget will be and what its increase will be. I would expect it'll be similar to last year, so maybe about 7% increase again this year.
Right, the other figure we always look at is growth. Now, your suggestion that this is performative, but it's also substantive, that figure.
So yeah, GDP growth is obviously a key indicator for not just the economic performance, but really political performance as well. So every government department, every bureaucrat is really measured on economic growth. So it's a very political number. Xi Jinping committed in 2020 to double the economy by 2035. And to do that, he needs about 5% growth. So I expect this year they will announce about 5%, maybe 4.5%, maybe 5%. But I think that's a political target. just as it was last year. And remember, there's precedent for this. And Deng Xiaoping in 1982 wanted to quadruple the economy by the year 2000, which then created the 8% target for economic growth, which persisted all the way until 2011, when it just wasn't sustainable anymore. So you're going to get that political push to have 5% economic growth, and that'll be announced in the next day or two. What I think is maybe a bit of a contradiction is that economic growth actually is probably slower. I think if one does an objective analysis, it's probably closer to 3% or below. Maybe this year will be even a little slower than last year because there are a lot of factors that are creating headwinds. Overcapacity, the housing crisis, deflationary trends. China's been in a deflation period for several years now. And of course, that's hurting domestic consumption. Household spending is down. People are holding their money, which is slowing economic growth. And it's becoming more dependent on that industrial policy, government financing, subsidies for industry, and efforts to increase consumption have stalled a bit. And I think that's something they're going to try to fix, but it's a big challenge. And I think they're much more comfortable with industrial policy and industrial subsidies than they are with boosting consumer spending organically.
Because boosting consumer spending would mean radical restructuring of China's very model of the economy. And that will not happen under Mr. Xi, will it?
I think it's unlikely. I think Xi Jinping is really focused on control. And through control, he gets security, he gets certainty. And I think he's reluctant to let market forces really lead the economic growth. So I think he's much more comfortable with state-led growth, with state-owned enterprises taking the lead, with the Communist Party setting targets, and not being as dependent on markets and consumers that are not reliable.
All right, and we have to ask, slightly going off on a tangent, if you want to control, you do not want surprise. So we had news early today, the CPPCC voting not to include 3 retired military generals on the NPC. One of these gentlemen, I believe you actually know personally. If you do not want surprise, why would you announce something like this in the lead up to your biggest event on the political calendar?
So I don't think that was intended as a surprise. I think the actual participants at the NPC are announced immediately before the meeting, and people looking at last year's roster and this year's roster see that there's a certain number of people who are not included, not just military officials, but civilian ones as well. I mean, I think purges have been a feature of Xi Jinping's tenure since he came into office in 2012 and came to power. So I think this is not a surprise. Purges are really a feature of governance now in China. And the fact that some generals are no longer on the list, they're being replaced by others. And I think that's a conveyor belt of leadership that is now a norm. And I'm sure it creates a lot of discomfort and concern amongst people within China about their own personal security. It creates uncertainty, but I think that's part of how Xi Jinping governs and something that we all have to get used to.
So not a contradiction, confidence amidst intense fear. Final question.
It's a management technique. Xi Jinping is trying to control a very, very, very large bureaucracy. There's almost 100 million Communist Party members. Having them all ideologically aligned, having them all loyal to the party, ensuring that they're not using the party for their own ends and that they're there actually serving the party has been one of his priorities. So ensuring that people serve the party and don't use the party to serve themselves is an ongoing challenge. And I think he's going to continue to purge people. I think we're going to see it reflected in major meetings like this. And he'll continue to reconstitute the rosters of government and the rosters of the military and the rosters of the party. There's a lot of people who want to serve and believe in the ideological direction that Xi Jinping takes, the path towards socialism, the China dream of national rejuvenation that he wants to achieve by 2049. And I think that's what he's trying to accomplish is by creating enough uncertainty within the bureaucracy that people are committed to follow his path, not challenge him, and not take advantage of the system for their own ends. And I think we'll see that reflected in the 2 meetings.
We will see how that plays out over the next week and ends on the 11th of March. Thanks so much for joining us. Drew Thompson, Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies from NTU here in Singapore.